Well, hello again, everybody. My name is Rob Godlewski. I'm your host today for the Think Small podcast. And today our guest is Mike Fidgeon with Hillcrest Family Services in Northeast Iowa. Mike, thanks for being our guest today.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Outstanding. Well, we had a conversation a couple weeks back, and what I'd like to do is just kind of, talk to our audience today about how you got into this line of work and what finally brought you to Hillcrest Family Services.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about my story and about Hillcrest, which I'm super proud of. I got into this line of work through my parents. They were both career parole probation officers, and despite my intention to be an orthopedic surgeon, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I I took on working with delinquent youth shortly after college, and that carved the path for me going forward. And I ended up in behavioral health services on the administrative operating end of that over time, and worked with an organization that scaled a lot of businesses like Hillcrest across the country, ultimately went public. And then I was a part of leading and selling the vertical in that business that was a behavioral health vertical. So that brings us almost to the present. Post sale, COVID hit, and in the middle of COVID, I decided to take this job out in Dubuque, Iowa, with Hillcrest Family Services, an organization that had been around since 1896, started as an orphanage and evolved to serve children and moms, and then children and adults, and kind of grew in the space of mental and behavioral health in the residential bricks and mortar type of care delivery. And over time added components to it that brought it also into the schools and into community settings, which was my background. So when I came here, I've been tasked with having the opportunity to help redesign the business a little bit to fit more with the direction that the state of Iowa and other states have gone in their mental and behavioral health service delivery.
That's great. And so it's a very far cry from wanting to be an orthopedic surgeon, but clearly uh, your career choice is driven by passion and mission, and which is much appreciated and much needed these days. So I gotta say thank you for your career choice.
Yeah, thank
it's
you for that.
it's services that many of us need, whether for ourselves or family members, and are gonna need in the future. So much needed. Um, Tell me about, it's 150-ish-year-old business, but you've only been there for about 4 or 5 years, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I came in the middle of the summer, July of 2020, which, if we reflect back to that time, was
Oh
really
man, that was
the
the heart of it.
yeah, that was the big spike of COVID, right? I think there was some indications that there was a problem that fall, and then they were known by the winter, and coming into the spring, it was a full blown pandemic. And at the time I came, I'd say in the next 6 months we came down the backside of that curve. And but then
Hmm.
we saw that go back up again within the next 12-month period of time. So it was an interesting time, because the business here, its epicenter is in Dubuque, Iowa. It sits on a 10-acre campus and has a lot of residential buildings on it. And at one point, not too long before I arrived, there were as many as 200 kids that received services here. They were bussed in for alternative school education on a new school facility that was built here on campus. And then there were residents as well, kids that were receiving everything while they lived here: behavioral health, mental health interventions. They might have been delinquent youth involved with the courts or substance abuse issues. And, in addition to having those addressed, they also needed to continue to progress in school. And so the organization had school services, educational services, et cetera. And but when I came during COVID, This was an interesting ghost town, and some of those programs had since been discontinued because the move of the state was to decrease their congregate care settings.
Right. So, having to live through a uh, a global pandemic like that, clearly as your role as president and CEO, you've had to probably pivot some of your service offerings, either stop offering some specific services, maybe adding some more. So tell me about your approach in dealing with some of those changes that you probably had to make in the recent times.
Yeah, so great question. The the impact of COVID for this business was interesting because when I arrived, about 50% of, if I quantify it, I'd say $20 million in revenue at that time. And that's inclusive of charitable gifts. So not just operating revenues. We're coming
Okay.
from residential services, and much like nursing homes, that I think probably most of the audience could relate to in regard to the challenges in COVID. That was what was the case for, whether it was adolescents or adults that we had in residential care. They continued to receive service because that was where they lived, right? Whereas more traditional mental and behavioral health services like outpatient counseling, therapy, prescribing services. Those historically had happened in person, in offices, predominantly 90% were in face-to-face office settings, maybe 10% help happened at, prior to my arrival in school settings or community-based or actually in people's home, but that was the exception, not the norm. And so
Okay.
those programs in particular had to stop, right? You couldn't be face to face with clients in the middle of COVID, and the federal government and state governments introduced legislation and relaxed regulation to allow for telehealth, right? So that was how a lot of things got accomplished and innovated. Quite honestly, the fact that we're having this conversation and we've had a couple so far by video conference. That's,
That's right.
seems like we've always done video conference, and I don't know that that was the case. I think we saw, a huge multiplier for the use of video conference in all businesses, but especially in healthcare. So I'd say that was a big pivot and an increase in the way that we were able to deliver care while not being face to face, and it's helped to both create innovative opportunities for service delivery for client care, as well as help to evolve our business to what it is today and what it will be tomorrow.
Yeah, that's you've had to go through a lot during that process. Operationally speaking, you've literally had to figure out a way to deliver your service offerings in a completely different way. So, just from a purely operational standpoint, what kind of changes did that did that have an effect for you in your business?
Yeah, so I think the thought that first comes to my mind in response to your question is uh, the necessity of clarity, right? That as things were changing, both external forces that we didn't have control over, like COVID, and things that we did have control over, like strategy, right? How are we going to respond to external forces, whether those are opportunistic tailwinds or threats to business that create headwinds for us. I've always been of the opinion that uncertainty doesn't reward shrinking things, right? It rewards clarity. And
Yeah.
so we did a lot during those times. In my first year here, we reset our mission, we reset our vision and value statements. We created a common language among the workforce that I refer to our employees as colleagues, among all colleagues of Hillcrest, inclusive of our board of trustees. to kind of reset direction and decide what are we pulling forward that's either legacy or it's core to our mission, and what are we needing to add and do differently, as we've talked about with regard to some of the innovations and changes that came from COVID, and where do we see the puck heading to on the ice, if I can, channel Wayne Gretzky for a minute, and how do we skate to
I
that?
love that.
Yeah, how do we skate to that place on the ice? And so part of that was, trying to gather the team together and determine direction, and then create some clarity around, what's the new mission and vision, and how do we plan on getting there? What's our strategic plan over a 3-year period? So, we had to deal with, are we going to cut our way to greatness? Again, I've never been one that thinks that, you should shrink your way to greatness. But at the same time, there were things that were either obsolete or that had become drags on the businesses, on the various programs that we ran, that either needed to be pruned or cut out altogether. So I don't know if that's responding well to the question that you've asked me. I'll stop there, just see what questions you want to add.
Yeah, no, that's exactly where I wanted to go with that, right? You've as leading the business, you've got to figure out what's still working and maybe what isn't. So give me some examples of some of those services or product offerings that you've had to either scale back or completely eliminate based on the changes that were forced upon the business during COVID.
Yeah, so I came out of the for-profit business before I took this role. My involvement with nonprofits was under management agreements. As a for-profit, we often had nonprofit entities that we provided shared support back office services to. So and that meant at times that we might be involved with helping with guiding the business strategically, or in terms of board governance and things of that nature. So that was my exposure initially to nonprofits. When I came out here and I was hands-on, sleeves rolled up, right away, I learned that there's a lot of complexity and there's a lot of different revenue streams, because with nonprofit opportunities, or legal structure is the opportunity to take, charitable gifts, where there's not that in the businesses I had been a part of before, as well as grants that often are exclusive to 501c3 entities. So as we got into, when we looked at opportunities to go after things, or I looked at what did we currently have in our portfolio of programs, I discovered that this business over time had aggressively taken on a lot of grants at the local, state, and federal level. And the
Okay.
preponderance of those were sort of $100,000 or less, right? So, an example going back to your question would be, the business had done WIC services with women and infant children for 30 years across a multiple county area. And when I came in, there was competitive pressure from Visiting Nurses Association here, who was increasing their footprint in maternal health in areas that we didn't. And at some point, it just made
Okay.
sense that, if you carved WIC into them, it would be a better place for it to be delivered than 90% of maternal services delivered by them, and 10% you come over to our business for. So we assessed whether or not that was strategically the right thing for us to stay in, and we also looked at those grants, which had us taking $100,000 or $200,000 of funding, but running at another 20% beyond that number to deliver care. So we were typically
Mm.
losing on many of these smaller grants, because they typically didn't cost in a lot of your overhead infrastructure, and management and leadership and those sorts of things, when either they were written for, or the way that the RFP was written, you might be limited.
Right. So, and if I'm not mistaken, it takes the same amount of internal resources to apply for $100,000 grant as it does for $1 million grant.
Yeah, that's a great insight. And as you say that, I think about from my for-profit experience, we used to say, if we're going to buy a $500,000 company or a $5 million company, um, if all things being equal, unless there's some strategic and/or tactical reason that the 500,000 brings more value, there's a particular service that it brings that we otherwise wouldn't have, or a license or something like that might be the only reason
Right.
we're going to spend $50,000 to do due diligence on either one of them, right? So fifty thousand
That's very
dollars
true.
$500,000 versus $50,000 to gain $5 million, it makes the same point I think that you're making.
Yeah. So I'm sure you got to the point where I hate to say it in such frank terms, but the juice really wasn't worth the squeeze anymore.
Right.
Now,
Yeah.
having said that, I also appreciate the fact that you're caring about the recipients of that work, right, in the women with infant children setting. And it sounds like you found a place for those services to land rather than just exiting that space and leaving those clients out there to find something on their own, right? It sounds like you worked with the Visiting Nurses Association to essentially transfer that service work to them, which I
Yeah,
applaud.
you're absolutely right. So there's a thought and an example that come to my mind that are in line with what you're describing that I believe
Yeah,
Hillcrest does exceptionally well. The thought is that, unlike my for-profit experience, this nonprofit in particular is referred to as a safety net provider. So
right,
one of our core services are certified mental health centers, of which we have 5 that serve multi-county area in Northeast Iowa. And in being such, we cannot turn people away based on their inability to pay. So whether they're underinsured or uninsured, we deliver care, which means we often deliver care at a loss or with no payment at all.
hmm,
And that makes how we receive money and manage things financially even that much more important, because in that line of service, mental health centers, which is core, if that were all we did, we would constantly be in the red. And so there are other programs that carry margin that happen to backfill that. So that was the thought. Here's another example, I think, of what you're drawing out, which is caring for people, right? And kind of putting doing right by people, people over profits, right? We have a 70
right,
bed facility that's just a stone's throw from our campus for adults with serious mental health issues, chronic mental health issues. And it's basically their home for many of them. For many of them,
hmm,
the ability to step down into a more normalized community setting may not exist because of their acuity of need, as well as not having the capacity within communities to deliver that care. We're fortunate because we do deliver some of that care. We have 5-person adult group homes, which puts people in more of a community-based setting if they're able to manage within the community in that way. But we're in the process of closing a 70-bed facility because the state, under federal mandate, whether that's come through lawsuits under DOJ, Department of Justice, or other departments, has a mandate, like many other states, to decrease state institutions and congregate care settings, and to move to more of these community-based, smaller settings that are more normalized for people to have a community-based experience rather than an institutional-like experience. So we're getting out of that business, but we've done exceptional care for the 60 to 70 people that have been there over time. Some of them will convert into our 5-person adult group homes, and some of
right.
them, the states and the managed care entities, will need to find placements for them that are more like what they're closing, that belongs to us currently.
And I got to hand it to you for keeping that recipient of services in mind as you go through your strategic repositioning of the business, right? Um, so when you came to Hillcrest Family Services, again, you mentioned you're coming from a for-profit environment to a nonprofit environment, and you realized there are other sources of income or revenue, right? Grants, donations, either personal or corporate donations. So what was the split between service revenue and I'll call it donations and grant revenue when you got here, and what is it now? And do you have like a specific target that you would like to see for each?
Yeah, I wish I could say that we were that dialed in terms of intention, right? And the goal around that. A lot of it in the pruning of services, and determining what goes and what stays and what gets, redesigned or reinvented. Our percentage of
Yeah,
what I refer to as operating revenue versus, well, I think we use, it falls under in our accounting ledgers as mission advancement. Mission advancement dollars consist of philanthropic, charitable giving, as well as fundraisers that we do annually,
sure.
seasonally, where we either ask people to make donations or we run uh, uh, a light show at from Thanksgiving to Christmas time that's called Reflections in the Park, where we charge people in cars to go through and see a light show that's been going on now for, I think this was year 31 for Hillcrest to be running that, and it generates about 350, $400,000 in revenue from Thanksgiving to New Year's. And
No, that's great.
yeah, once you net out the expense to deliver that, and it is an undertaking, we contribute a couple hundred grand of that to our operating costs, whether that's infrastructure or whether that helps to offset the cost of care or supplement underinsured and
Sure.
underinsured. Just basically helps to backfill our losses. So yeah, back to your question. I'd say that right now, 90% of our revenues are operating revenues, and the other 10% come from gifts and things that are not
Okay.
necessarily programmatic.
Yeah. And is there a goal that you have in mind to get that 10% maybe to a higher level?
Yeah, I'd like to see that, up to 20%. And some of that also has to do with improving our work around contributions toward an endowment. We have a small endowment. We'd like to, triple that
Okay.
endowment so that we can take gains off of that as needed, at say 4 to 5% of the endowment, and bring that into, operating needs when and if we needed to do that.
Right.
And then beyond that, if we needed to tap that for something strategic, whether that was investing in something that supports a pivot in our strategy, whether that was facilities, although I don't see us going in that direction. It could be vehicles or something that allows us more mobility in our care and allows us to get more embedded in the communities rather than having people come to us. That's another way that we could use endowment funds, over time as well.
So you've been here 4 to 5 years. You've clearly made some changes, whether relating to your service offerings. What does the next 3 to 5 years look like for Hillcrest and the services for that Northeast Iowa community?
Yeah, the next 3 to 5 years is really about building momentum. We've spent calendar year 25, so January through December that we just finished, doing what we named a reset sprint for the business, right? That was the pruning of programs. We took it from 28 or 29 unduplicated programs down to about 19. And those programs reflect the number of GLs that we have to look at our business units and programs independent of each other, so we can assess how the performance of a single adult group home is doing against its peer group of four others, right? And look at them all
Right.
individually in the case of where we might duplicate same types of services. And then we look at our residential programs differently than we look at the revenues created by our fee for service therapy and prescribing services and our mental health services. The as we to your question, um, stabilizing has been a core to that reset intention, and now we're building momentum because while we were also pruning, we were adding. There were some merging of funding sources where substance abuse services got brought into mental health services in a way that they hadn't been funded since my arrival here. And we got out ahead of that by about 9 months in building an addictions recovery program. And we've seen increased momentum as we increase the service offerings within our addictions recovery and watch that grow because we now have targeted funding to be able to deliver that type of care. So that would be an example as we move into the next 3 to 5 years, is to align to the redesign that the state has created and to
Mhm.
provide services that are going to be funded by predominantly Medicaid and Medicare services. Our revenues are 85 to 90% government assistance.
Sure, sure. So, so Mike, tell me about a time here at Hillcrest where you were really thrown a curveball or something, came up that you weren't really expecting. Now, you came here in the summer of 2020, so you knew that there was a global pandemic, facing you. So you can't use that as a surprise. But what might be an example of that, and how did you deal with it?
Yeah, the best example, and the one that comes right to my mind, and it was within the first 3 months that I was here after spending time where I think I should in my first 3 months, was a lot of time in the CFO's office. And I learned pretty quickly that we didn't have a line of sight to accounts receivable down to the client encounter level. Meaning, if you and I received a service here, we'd be able to see what day we came in for what service code, what the rate was that it was billed out, and for the month of January, we were now 70 days or over 60 days due on receiving payment for the services that we provided to Rob.
Right.
We didn't have that line of sight. We were dealing with AR more on cash flow. We think we're doing okay because what we posted as revenue and billed out, we have coming in 90 days later, just about the same amount. Right. That was kind of the response I got, and it was not a response I was happy with, or that I was familiar with, or that
Right.
way that things worked in my past. So in trying to understand it, long story short, we had an RCM issue that was borne out when I had our independent auditor come in and do a RCM review. And the scope,
And what is RCM?
yeah, revenue cycle management. Sorry about that.
Got it. Thank you.
So we had a revenue cycle management review done, which is basically looking at how a bill becomes a law. Right, the customer comes in on the front end and has insurance, and you take it and you set them up for services, and you deliver care, and you bill care, and you collect care, and you look at it through that entire revenue cycle.
Sure.
Technology we rely on for that is called an electronic health record. And our electronic health record uh, in this audit did not allow the clinical side, what our therapists and prescribers were putting in about their delivery of care and what hours and codes and billing, and then it goes off to the financial function to be billed and collected. Um, they weren't synchronized in a way that made it effective enough to create the view to accounts receivable and what was owed us by clients. So we ultimately needed to replace that system. It took me a couple years to get us to the point where we picked out what made sense.
Mhm.
And then right at the point of being ready to implement, about a month before, two of our project leaders, for different reasons, were not able to continue in the work that they were doing. So we had to push pause for 5 months. I triaged it with somebody from my network who came in and did a filled the gap in terms of subject matter expertise in that area until we could rehire those positions. And so that was a significant impact in knowing we needed to put a new system in, and then having the implementation of that new system get significantly delayed, as well as knowing that those systems take time to get to a point where they're effectively doing what it is that the audit pointed out that they weren't doing well under the prior system.
Right, right. So you just brought up something that I'd like to dig into a little bit. You you saw a challenge facing the organization, and you reached out to someone in your network for help. And kind of a common theme that I'm seeing in my conversations with business leaders and CEOs like yourself is the need to have that network of mentors or trusted advisors, or simply just service delivery providers in your network that you could tap into when needed. Um, Talk to me a little bit about that and how you've managed those relationships throughout your career.
I'm a natural networker. So, in fact, if you were to give me a Myers-Briggs or another,
Yeah.
business profile, I would fall under, what would be defined in many as relationship based, and you know as you've probably experienced, in your audience will experience, depending on how you edit this down. I talk to think. I over explain. I give a lot of. I like to story tell, etc. And I've aggregated a lot of relationships over time. I think LinkedIn has sort of become my CRM in some ways. It keeps me connected to my past and my present, and I'm always looking for who don't I know that I'd like to know. And that's
Yeah,
where
yeah.
I go into the white and yellow pages and figure it out. Um, the network is really, for me, in the question you're asking, as I think about it, even in this example with the electronic health record, that happened to be a CIO, from my past, who I was like, oh, I'll call Sean up and I'll ask Sean, we've been through this before in terms of implementing systems. What
Right,
can I do? What's your advice? And, Sean
right.
was in a place where he had bandwidth, and he said, I can make a couple recommendations, or if you want to hire me, I can do this. Right. So, that worked out exceedingly well, as a result. Likewise, I've got people from my past that were part of the team I led. They might have been direct reports of mine that ran state operations, or my COO when I became the CEO of our behavioral health vertical, with a publicly traded company.
Hmm.
He now is the COO of an $80 million nonprofit in Maine. I had a Mid-Atlantic COO who, became the COO of a $150 million book of business in California that was a
Hmm.
for-profit behavioral health. So there are a number of people that I still stay in touch with that have moved from the role I knew them in into promotions and leading. And the great thing is they're having to solve the same types of problems that
Right.
we were faced with before when I happened to be the leader responsible to those things. But they have ideas and solutions that, in my own strength and Rolodex or memory, I wouldn't be able to leverage as much as I can if I reach out to them.
Right. And I guess the reason I'm asking that question is it seems to be a common theme within our my discussions with CEOs and business leaders, especially in this podcast audience. Uh, and that is knowing when you don't have the answer is okay. And having that relationship with a trusted advisor or a former colleague in your case, or former direct reports is very important, right? To get that outside view and potentially fill a gap in your resource constraint. So I appreciate your thoughts on that.
Mhm.
Mike, before we wrap up here, are there any kind of words of advice for leaders of small to mid-sized businesses to leave us with today?
Words of advice. So, well, as you were talking about the last topic we were on, I was the thought that kept going through my head was the importance of teamwork. My background since I was young was in athletics. Played on a lot of sports rec teams, and then through high school and college, and continued to stay involved as I aged, just enjoy organized and competitive sports. And so, hence the Wayne Gretzky, reference earlier.
Yeah.
But I remember a chief strategy officer once saying something that always stuck with me. And he said, Mike, if you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room. And I always like that because
Yeah.
it's a constant reminder that my success has never been my success. It's been a group achievement, right? That I'm usually, when I'm succeeding, I am not only not the smartest guy in the room, I might be the dumbest guy in the room in some cases, but smart enough to assemble talent, right? Smart enough to know when to get out of
Right.
other people's way, and let them do their work or be the one who's innovative or make the decision or come with a recommendation, et cetera. So, I think there's a place for humility. My leadership strengths tend to rise in crisis. My wife would say probably, to you, if you asked her, I think Mike probably creates crisis so he can manage a crisis. Um, I would beg to differ, but I can see where that might come from. I'm fairly calm under pressure, but I don't necessarily. I like to avoid pressure, and I think avoiding pressure is about creating strong systems and allowing mission-driven people to succeed.
Yeah, yeah, I really love that. And Mike, I think we're cut from the same cloth relative to being the smartest person in the room. I've been in both positions, and surrounding myself with people who are a whole lot smarter than I was just invigorating to me. So I definitely appreciate your comments on that. And with that, I think that's a great place to leave our discussion today. Mike Fidgeon, President and CEO of Hillcrest Family Services in Dubuque, Iowa. Mike, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate your insights.
Thank you for having me, Rob.